The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jolene Schaefer, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Proactively Controlling Operational Spend by Stanton Jandrell and Jesse Byam of Fraction. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation. It will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees, as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment at the end of the presentation to answer our 2-question survey. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. We've invited Fraction here today because they are the industry experts on procurement software and spend management. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Stanton.
Thank you so much, Jolene. Let me share my screen, make sure that we've got. All right, Jolene, are you able to see my screen?
Yep, it looks great.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for attending today. Between Jesse and myself, we're going to run you through some of the best practices that we've seen in being able to control indirect or operational spend in businesses. A little bit of a background. Fraction has been in the space of spend management for some 20 years. We're a multinational operation with offices in Seattle for North America, in Canada, and in Cape Town in South Africa, where we have a development environment, and hence my accent. A little bit about the business as a whole. We've got well over 1,000 spend management implementations worldwide. So on the basis of customer input, on the basis of practices that we see that customers are using on a day-to-day basis to reduce and manage spend, we've brought together today's seminar to share some of those best practices, especially in times of crisis. So today we're going to introduce people to the concept of spend management. And as Jolene mentioned, that is very much aligned to procurement and purchasing. But it's not solely just purchasing. And in spend management, we talk about all the activities that might result in a company spending money. The bulk of that clearly would be in purchasing, but we also talk a little bit about sourcing, ways in which to identify savings opportunities and engage with your vendors to be able to get better pricing, better terms. We also talk about spend analytics. In other words, trying to identify suppliers that we should be doing business with, suppliers we should be avoiding, items that we're buying, price differentials in those items. And then lastly, we look at employee-initiated expenditure, where employees are incurring those costs and need to claim them back from the organization. And the concept of Fraction is really to provide end-to-end spend management, to have a single system that starts with identifying the need for spend, running you through an approval and authorization process, making sure that whatever insight you need to make available to a manager so that they're able to make the most commercially competent decision is available. And in the background, have the system enforce whatever policies and procedures you feel are necessary to help identify savings opportunities, ensure budget compliance, and just generally mitigate and manage risk appropriately. And then clearly, once we've approved or authorized expenditure, we need to get this to a vendor in the most efficient way. So we talk a little bit about purchase order management itself, and then close out the transaction by receipting, invoice matching, and feeding back into the underlying ERP system. So in today's discussion, we'll start really with the purchase requisitioning side of things. In a Fraction environment, we believe in proactive control of spend. And what that really means is that organizations from the earliest intent to spend, need to be able to manage that in a way that's company compliant. And so for us, that means the point at which a person or an individual in the company raises their hand and says, I want, that is the point at which we want to be able to capture information, on the basis that it's impossible to really manage information that can't be captured effectively, and it's impossible to analyze information if we don't have data sources which we can review. So Fraction is a strong proponent of initiating all spend activities, actually even invoice approvals, from a requisitioning. This is the intent to spend. Now, in a remote environment, this becomes absolutely critical because we now need to facilitate organizations that have gone from 1 or 2 or 3 locations to n times locations, depending on the number of employees that they have. And so the spending processes and financial transactions that emanate from these spending processes are widely distributed. And getting control of these at the earliest stage becomes even more vital. And so requisitioning provides a powerful tool for us to be able to manage this process. And the stats are very clear on this, is that organizations that provide effective spend management from a requisitioning level tend to save significant amounts. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those savings are as we go through. But the first part of this is really around controlling and capturing the requisition.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned this, then, if you look at our stats there from Deloitte recently that said 63% of companies implementing solutions today aim to reduce costs and increase productivity. Those are pre-COVID. If you look at the stats coming out now from a cost savings perspective versus the productivity perspective, we're seeing a massive increase in the aim to reduce costs and to control costs and be able to proactively see where the costs are coming from before they hit the accounting department as an invoice. And that's really where we want to focus, is that proactive, how do I know prior to the purchase what's going on, and is it approved? Does it go through the proper workflows?
100%, and I think what's proving to be a huge catalyst for this now is that for organizations who had paper-based requisitioning systems or no requisitioning systems and relied on either email or communications with their managers, that might have been reasonably viable when everyone was in the same office. Removing that physical interaction means that these systems become very problematic. All the more so, especially for clients who aren't running sort of cloud-based ERP systems. There's still significant challenges in terms of enabling access to on-prem accounting systems. So if you're sitting in an environment where you're using possibly one of the older, more established ERP systems, and you don't have tools like this, well, getting the transaction into the accounting system becomes a very, very significant challenge.
Yeah, and even today, like I got another request today saying, hey, COVID has exposed us to show us exactly where all of our weaknesses in communication and advanced warning is around our purchasing and what we're doing from getting control of our employee spend. And I see that every single day. I have a new company comes. This has just exposed them to the risks that they're actually seeing and exposed where their breakdowns are in their systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is turning out to be one enormous catalyst to make sure that business continuity and transaction capability or transaction processing capabilities are able to be delivered. Yeah. And a lot of it starts with making sure that we have the right kind of tools so that people can capture that information. And we talk a lot about purchase requisitioning, but to a lot of people that often means the electronic equivalent to filling in a form. And I think some of the newer technologies, Jesse, today make it a lot easier for people to engage with the requisition in a similar way to that they're familiar with, for instance, in purchasing something from Amazon. So tools that allow users to buy as they would for normal consumer goods electronically or online make user adoption much, much higher. So PunchOut is one of these technologies that people may have heard of. And really, this is a technology that allows you in a tool like Fraction to be able to navigate directly to an Amazon, to a Staples, a Grainger, navigate through their items, add them to your shopping cart. And then instead of checking out your shopping cart in the normal conventional way, Where PunchOut is enabled, it allows you to submit those back into Fraction, essentially populating a requisition for you electronically and write that off for approval. And once approval has taken place, to automatically place those orders. So there's a increasing blurring between the way that you buy in a business environment versus the way that you buy in a consumer environment. And frankly, I think it's becoming easier. PunchOut and Catalog make buying a cinch. It's literally 1 or 2 clicks to navigate to the items that you want and to populate them all without having to worry about which vendor, what price, and all that kind of information.
And we are seeing a tremendous change in the market and the way that people purchase, for sure. So if you asked us, 4 or 5 years ago, how many people had an Amazon account, everybody had an Amazon account. And then you would ask them, well, what about your business? And very few businesses had Amazon accounts. A few would have Staples accounts, but they would just be, I order online, but it's not attached to anything. Very manual process. I go to a website, I buy it like I'm a person. If you were to ask companies today, how many companies have an Amazon or Staples website or account, we're seeing an uptick, like 50, 60% of every business that we touch or look at has that corporate account now with Amazon, with Staples, and they are utilizing those systems dramatically compared to what they used to even 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think COVID has really highlighted the benefits of systems like this. You're now able to navigate and identify the availability of stock, delivery times, and do this electronically without engaging in a person. So the old-fashioned way of sort of sending out an RFQ or chatting to someone who's sitting on site and either can do a stock count or has a system that makes availability of inventory sort of visible that they can share with you over the telephone, that's changing. People aren't in the office anymore. So online is certainly one of the bigger beneficiaries of this sort of drive to less human interaction.
One of the pieces, though, that people need to be careful of and clear on is that even though you have those accounts, visibility into those accounts is very hard if you don't have a system that manages that for you. You can have these great online systems or these accounts, but not everybody has visibility into them. They don't know, not everybody has access, and they don't manage the overall spend. They're just very specific to one little piece, and so maybe only 1 or 2 people really have visibility into what's going on in those accounts. Whereas if you get a system to manage around that, then it provides that visibility, and now you're empowering your employees to make smarter business decisions based on the data. And that's one of those keys in being proactive.
Yeah, completely agree. The flip side to making it easier for employees to acquire goods or services is that they may buy more. And what you want to do is still maintain that ease of buying with the control mechanisms that you used to or that your business demands. And one of those areas that we often ask and suggest to businesses is to focus on the supplier management side. I mean, in the previous slide, we spoke a little bit about PunchOut and how that creates an electronic bridge to communicating with vendors. But generally, when we engage with customers, one of the problems they identify is sort of rogue spending. And rogue spending by sort of definition is buying from a vendor that you don't have a pre-negotiated price or terms list from. And the interesting stat here is that the premium that people buy or pay for when buying from a vendor that hasn't gone through the whole vendor approval negotiation process can be as high as 20%. And often they'll buy because they've got personal relationships or they've experienced at an individual level degrees of service that sort of make them gravitate towards that vendor. But certainly procurement departments or buying departments, if the organization isn't big enough to justify a procurement department, with tools like Fraction, have the ability to identify how much they're buying from different spends, from different vendors in a particular category, and use that as an opportunity to negotiate better prices and terms. And in almost every instance where I've seen customers look at, for instance, how many pieces they're buying from 3 or 4 vendors, to have a look at what their previous spend and consumption has been, to take that data and say, look guys, we bought we bought PCs across 5 different vendors. If I bring this through to you as a vendor, what kind of discounts could I expect? Are there any kind of volume discounts over a certain buying or spending threshold that you can provide to me? And in times where businesses are depressed, this is an ideal opportunity to negotiate with your vendors to leverage the maximum benefit for maintaining that relationship. So I certainly see that as an important aspect of spend management, negotiating with vendors on a constant basis and identifying new vendors using RFQs and other sourcing technology. What's your take on that, Jesse?
And I agree with you. I think that, you know, a lot of times actually we can get great rates from our suppliers, but I think the relationship between our suppliers and us, we want to be able to focus on the ones that are critical for our business and make sure that we have a strong relationship. And yeah, maybe we don't get that last 1 or 2% off, but because we know what we spend with them, we're able to have constant communication, we get better service, and we have that better relationship. We're able to manage that appropriately, and we're able to see how that all flows through the system and works properly. I think it's critical that, one, you are checking your suppliers, and two, that you are, you know, getting the best prices you can get, but managing the relationships, so you're focusing on those relationships that are critical for your success and knowing what's going through those vendors so that you have that relationship, because a good relationship will give you, and the better service will give you a better output for your customers than just sometimes getting that lowest price when you've got delivery issues, you've got all these other issues that could come up, but because you don't have visibility in it, you don't even know they exist, they're just happening. And so being able to take that data and build those relationships around it, I think is critical for your success.
Yeah. And I think the other trend that we're seeing is that organizations are protecting liquidity. So even where sort of pricing from a vendor might not be, you know, the sharpest in every category, where they're getting extended terms, and by extended terms I mean pushing out to sort of 60 days, in some cases certainly 45-day payment terms, provides you with a liquidity advantage so that you've got cash on hand the whole time. I don't think that can be underestimated either in terms of potential to improve the financial viability of a business.
And we all know cash is king, so.
Yeah, exactly. You want to keep it preserved.
Yeah.
One of the things in spend management, obviously, is, you know, gathering all the information that we need to have on hand to approve or authorize expenditure. And then it really comes into the approval or authorization workflows. You know, how do we get that information to the people who need to make the right kind of decision? And I suppose there's a routing capability that we probably need to touch on. In other words, the ability to make sure that spend is routed on a workflow that's appropriate based on the department, the division, potentially a project, potentially a GL code. There are multiple ways that organizations like to see their spend approved. And sometimes it can be complex. It can be combinations of very simple departments, but there might be a job or a customer or a project that's been touched, and there might be a different approval routing that needs to follow based on those parameters. So I think approval workflows and flexibility when selecting a solution becomes key. You know, you don't want the system to be an impediment in terms of who needs to be able to touch that requisition before it's properly approved.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that, one, it needs to be automated because it's basic rules. You know, you need to have those, once those rules are laid out, it needs to be automated so that people aren't guessing what they need to do next. It should just say, well, if it's for this GL structure or if it's for this division, it needs to go in these areas. And two, it's very pointed communication. So, for example, you don't want to see a requisition go out and have it go out to 20 people when only 2 of them really need to touch it. And so having those really pointed communications and that workflow approval so that it's touched minimally but appropriately, and so that it's not overloading the organization, are critical in that success level.
Yeah, and what I wanted to say on that approval workflow is that many organizations have got nuances associated with their approval limits and restrictions. So, you know, we're happy to host any questions or answer any questions towards the end of this presentation around approval workflows. I know it can be quite complex. Let's talk a little bit about budgets. One of the things that I've noticed is organizations that weren't that fussed about budgets, and especially where there's a number of sort of high-value employees, the expectation was that employees would always sort of self-manage, are now starting to become much more aware of spending relative to the organization's trading position. And in some cases, we've seen budgets come through very aggressively, and reforecasting happening as often as every quarter. And one of the areas that's very, very interesting for me is organizations that have strong financial budgeting have the ability to reforecast and update based on the organization's trading, what the revenue is, seem to be the ones that respond more nimbly to significant changes.
I think the budget, like being able to visually see the budget and know where you're at with that budget before you make the purchase, is actually one of the key areas of being proactive in this process. Yeah. And it's the availability of data, the democratization of the data as we go through digital transformation with a lot of these companies, is being able to get that data to the employee so they can make a data-driven decision. So if they're going out to make that purchase, and it's a big, it's a substantial purchase, before they do it, being able to see exactly where they're at with the budget and what impact that will have on the budget is critical in being able to give them the power to be proactive, to make better decisions for you. The last thing you want is that every decision has to be made by someone at a senior level, because nobody else has the data, and so they just put through everything. And so now that person's trying to pick and choose and try to figure it out where the priority really lies. Whereas if you empower your employees and they can see budget, they can see where they're at, and they can proactively look at it, they'll make way better buying decisions. And so that's a change in the way that they actually do their purchasing or their decision making in that process. And I think that's critical, absolutely critical, in being able to be proactive in your spend management.
Yes, I see more and more the need to make sure budget availability, and in fact, not only budget availability, but giving good insight into what your commitments are at the point of decision. At the time the employee needs to say yes or no as an approver, he or she needs to have access to that information. And we're seeing a very significant shift from the old budget variance reporting that was generated on a month-end basis. And the department manager was then sort of wrapped over the knuckles if they had breached budget or there was a significant variance. And the correct response from those managers was, well, had I had insight into this information when I was making my decision, quite possibly I would have made a different decision. But you can't expect me to make a decision absent the kind of data. So this visibility at the point of decision making is absolutely critical for effective budget management in a company.
Well, and it speaks to the risk side of that. If you can lower your risk in through that process, that speaks volumes to your process and where you're going as a company. Because, like you said, if after the fact, you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk from a purchasing perspective and then spend management side of things if you're not seeing that till after the fact.
Oh yeah, and by after the fact, even efficient companies I've seen only deliver those budget variance reports 5, 6, 7 days after close, and close might be 5 or 6 days after month end. So typically by the 15th of the next month, these managers are confronted with, in middle of July, what their budget variance was in June, and they're going like, help, the horse is bolted. What am I supposed to do with this information now? So trying to bring that to the point of decision is going to be vital for ongoing compliance with budgets.
Well, and it has to be, you and I always talk about, understanding the difference between committed costs and actual costs. So, if I've got that purchase order out there, I want to know, even though it's not fulfilled, I haven't received the invoice, it may not have hit the accounting system the same way. I need to know where that is. And I need to know how much committed costs I've got out there versus how many actual invoices have come through the door and against that budget. Then I can make a great decision, because without that, I can't.
Look, we spent a lot of time talking about requisitioning, and the process of requisitioning generally generates a purchase order if it's approved, and then there's an invoice that flows through. But one of the areas that we sometimes neglect is a lot of spend in an organization, isn't accompanied by a purchase order, is subject to some kind of contract. Your rent, utilities, these kind of spending activities are significant in an organization. And so invoice approval, even when expenditure isn't associated with a purchase order, becomes quite vital. I can't tell you the number of times that post-implementation, we've seen environments where many suppliers had been submitting duplicate invoices, or some, I'm not necessarily saying this is by design or an actual fraudulent intent, have re-invoiced for the same items. And without tools to understand when duplicates are likely to have occurred, or with basic invoice number validation, or even without invoice number validation, if the description or the value is similar to previous invoices, people need to be alerted. People need to be made aware of these potential duplicate payments, double payments for the same kind of invoices. So even though I'm a strong proponent of requisitioning for purchase orders, I don't think we can ignore or should ignore invoices that come through that aren't associated with purchase orders. And the whole idea about an effective spend management system is we need to close the loop. We need to deal with proactive spend, and we need to deal with spend that we are going to incur, but we still want to be able to approve and authorize before we actually make that payment.
And you want to run, so those invoices that aren't associated to a PO, you still want to run those through an appropriate approval process in a very streamlined, automatic way, and make that a quicker, easier process in your business. And you want to be able to see all that together.
Absolutely. I mean, so often I've seen organizations get blindsided when vendors have inefficient processes and forget to invoice. One of the benefits about having a more rigorous process is that you can still incur the commitment in the right period, even if the vendor's forgotten to invoice, and catch it up whenever the invoice arrives. But it makes closing and it makes accuracy of that fiscal period much more efficient. Jesse, I mean, this is an area that you have to deal with the whole time, expenses and travel. So, I mean, running a sort of sales and marketing team, maybe you've got some insight in here that's a bit better than my day-to-day insight.
Well, and it is interesting because I obviously running our team and in the expenses that go around travel and meals, all those type of things, but also from a client perspective, we deal with so many companies who come to us and just like, we have no idea what our employees are doing. We have all these policies. We don't know how to enforce them. That we don't even know if they're enforced. So much of it is just so reactive and not proactive. I find the stats on this quite interesting. So 35% of companies still use a manual-based expense reporting system. So those are your paper. They'll submit a receipt. But if you actually looked at the stats, what they call a non-manual could be an Excel spreadsheet, which really isn't that much better, and it's still very reactive. They're not seeing things come in every day. They're not knowing what their committed is. And two, they're having a hard time enforcing their policies around that. And so, and some of them are actually using their ERP systems to do that, which is great, but the process is so cumbersome that the employees go around it or they skirt it because user adoption becomes a big deal in this process.
Yeah.
And so I think you want the simplicity around expense management for travel, for meals. It needs to be easy for your employees to do it, but easy for everybody else to understand and see what's going on and be able to enforce those policies in that process, because this is one place where rogue spending or maverick spending really can happen. How do we expense that? How are we splitting bills? Are we doing all kinds of different stuff to try and get around those policies? And not saying that employees are bad. They understand the systems and they know how to game them and figure out how to beat them so they can get the things that they need done. Now, what we want to change is the psychological position of your employees, so they know what they need to do. They understand the policies. You have systems in place to enforce the policies, but it's easy for them to use, easy for them to do, so that instead of waiting 2 or 3 months to submit their expenses, they're submitting them on a daily, weekly basis, so that you're seeing that and you're able to proactively look at them and see them.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. Even organizations that have implemented a Concur or Certify or one of these systems, it means that you've got point solutions for certain aspects of your spend. I think some of the thinking when we initially designed Fraction was to say, we want one place to manage all approval hierarchies. We want one place to manage policies throughout the organization, whether they're purchasing or expense reporting policies. We want to run one approval system. And the incorporation of expenses was, vital to achieve that vision. Another thing which also shouldn't be noted is, if you're late with your expenses to employees, gee, can they complain? This is something, especially if they have incurred the costs themselves, they want to be reimbursed quickly. So delays in process can have an impact on morale. But the one thing that I've seen is if someone's been reimbursed for the expenditure, they never have significant complaints about raising a requisition to get reimbursed. So the fact that we incorporate this into a full-blown spend management system that deals with procurement as well, or purchasing, means that user adoption is likely to be much, much higher when people realize, hey, the system is not only for controlling me in the case of expenses, it's for getting my money back.
Well, and I think you raise a great point. It's very easy to go out and get some of these little point solutions, and all of a sudden from an IT perspective, you're managing 100 applications. Every division's got their own little piece for this, their own little piece for that. And like you said, when we built Fraction and our prime product, we were looking at that all-in-one type solution so that your spend is all in one place. From an IT perspective, obviously being the cloud, that makes this very, very easy. And two, you don't have rogue IT systems out there where people are using these little point solutions that IT doesn't know about, but yet somehow they're supposed to be managing. So it really does consolidate and make management of that system substantially easier, which is critical if you want to be proactive in that spend. Otherwise, people end up spending so much money on these little point solutions, it all adds up and your IT budget gets blown out of the water.
Well, that's also a great segue into this area around spend analytics. One of the goals in looking at a simple solution that covered both purchasing, expense reporting, and invoices was that you now have a platform, a standardized platform where all the data is in one system. And it means regardless of the spending process, whether it's an expense report and claim, whether it's an invoice, whether it's proactive in terms of purchase ordering, we now can determine very effectively data around who our vendors are, who we're buying, how much we're spending with each one of these people. And so the ability to have a standardized data platform is one of those key considerations when determining, should we buy 3 different or 4 different systems? So often people consolidate to Fraction, and we find that where they've got systems, which is probably less common, most companies implement our system not having electronic systems, but where they do, often you'll find they've got some basic purchasing solution that's allowed them to take the first steps of the digital journey, but it hasn't grown with them as an organization. As I mentioned before, they might have a Concur, a Certify, or one of these expense management systems. They might have some sort of AP automation tool as well, and they might have some kind of custom reporting that tries to give them insight into their spending behavior. So really, for us, spend management is that nexus of all of those spending activities with a common data set, a data platform that we can leverage well. And we've seen tremendous benefit to, for instance, identifying rogue spending behavior, to identify high-risk transactions in real time as they've been routed through an approval or authorization process, which is almost impossible to do when you've got disparate data sets sitting in point solutions. So I think one of the underrated benefits of a consolidated solution is just this deep pool of vast data around spend analytics and our ability to report on this. And that reporting is becoming more and more sophisticated. I mean, our first reports were frankly fairly basic. I mean, much better than having no reports. And then our ability to output and provide that data in Excel formats to allow companies to manipulate and build up their own pivot tables and slice and dice was useful, and certainly was a huge step up from what they were used to. And I think now, as we start introducing some of the Azure technologies to this vast data set, using Power BI to do dashboarding and more advanced reporting, I think now we're seeing the real power of extracting data from this common platform. And it's only helping customers more and more in terms of their vendor negotiations and identifying where savings opportunities are.
Yeah, and I love the ability that using the AI, it can start to identify the risk transactions as they're happening, and they can start to pop up the warnings early. Our whole conversation today is about proactively controlling your spend. And it's those type of alerts based on what the data is telling you that help you do that. It's critical in that success of being able to be very proactive versus reactive, which is unfortunately with COVID, where many people found themselves in that reactive situation, trying to figure out where they were at, what was going on, instead of proactively going after it and being able to capitalize on the things that they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's so vital. I mean, that alert management that you're talking about, helping identify in real time potential problems, is something I probably didn't stress enough when we were talking about the approvals or authorizations. But that ability to configure policies, including risk policies, including budget compliance policies, and have that part and parcel of the decision-making process, so that as a manager, when I get that requisition, that invoice to approve, it tells me what's wrong with that invoice as well. So not only does it present what the financial impact is, it also tells me, and using massive data extraction, and as you point out, that's where AI and machine learning comes into play, it tells me which transaction is potentially the riskiest, which falls outside of the norms for my organization. And having that power really gives play to that stat that says, if you have proper data analytics, it's going to be vital in terms of cost reduction. It's going to be vital in terms of risk mitigation. Larger companies find this absolutely invaluable, especially if they've got any kind of internal audit team. They're looking for problems, and they've got their own mechanisms, their own algorithms and rules that they use to try identify spend that's inappropriate. The goal of our tool is to also provide insight into fraud analytics, risk analytics, but at the time of decision. So you can say, hang on a second, something is funny about this particular transaction, and the system's telling me it's this transaction from this vendor, from this individual. Let me go drill down into that. And one of the biggest areas that we're seeing of savings is really where visibility of a system, being able to monitor down to that level, starts modifying user behavior. And I can't stress this enough. Your best savings opportunity isn't negotiating that extra 5% from a vendor. I mean, it's vital. But for operational spend, it's often just deferring that spend to another period. Should we be buying as many? Should we be buying at all? Should we be buying next month or the month after versus now? And tools like ours provide managers and the users with that kind of insight to question whether they should be incurring spend. And that, to me, that sort of cost avoidance or spend avoidance is one of the biggest savings that we see in organizations.
Well, and the spend behavior change, that's huge, and you've talked about it a couple of times, but you have most companies during COVID and all the things that have happened, this is your chance to change spend behavior. Because if you put the systems in, you get them in place, and you can change that spend behavior, it really does proactively change the way that your organization works. And this is a perfect opportunity to do that. You're going to have, potentially less staff or a lot of new staff, whatever it might be. This really is a chance to reset. And so companies need to look at their organization and say, how can we do the reset now so we can benefit from that moving forward?
We've spoken a lot about putting in place systems that essentially funnel requests, provide approval authorization capability, able to slice and dice the data that's extracted from that. But ultimately, this needs to get back into your accounting system. And I'm particularly proud to sort of share that Fraction has a wide range of certified integrations. For Acumatica, we are 1 R2 approved. The only true cloud spend management system for Acumatica. And for the Sage product set across most of the platforms, including 100 and 300, we're one of the only true cloud-based spend management platforms that provide deep real-time integration through the APIs into these underlying platforms. So that's one of the areas that if anyone is interested in finding out a little bit more, it's possibly out of the scope of the discussion that we have now, but we're happy to provide white papers on how deeply we integrate into your underlying accounting system and make sure the data that's in the accounting system is reflected in Fraction, and vice versa. Make sure the transactions that are initiated in Fraction appear in Acumatica, appear in Sage 100 automatically. So Jesse, I mean, just in closing, I suppose key tenets of the sort of Fraction solution are really around simplicity. We've taken a tremendous amount of effort to ensure that the user experience when engaging with a solution like Fraction, and there were some screenshots in the background that sort of reflected what the application looked like, is easy to use, isn't an impediment to user adoption, and is just plain and simple. And that doesn't come easily. You know, engineering for simplicity, if you've ever used an Apple device or what have you, it looks simple, but there's a ton of engineering that goes behind the scenes to make that super simple. And maybe in the words of one of our customers, it can give you a real insight into proper savings. And we chose this particular customer. Albert's working at one of the larger universities. And I think we've got about 300, 400 users in this environment. And they've had to migrate, like most companies, to a work from home. And you know, his comments to us were that if he hadn't installed spend management, and he did this very fortuitously, just in time, it went live before the shutdowns went in place. He certainly believed that the entire finance system would have come to a grinding halt, because they run an older, I think in their particular case, Sage 300 implementation, and it didn't have any effective work from home capabilities. So they're still able to process, they're still able to approve, they're still able to buy, and that's 100% ascribed through to Fraction.
And I think companies that are going down the road for digital transformation, you know, that's a long road. You know, you just don't wake up tomorrow and you're in the cloud. But there are specific point type solutions like our procurement solution, you know, our Fraction side, where you can really add a lot of value and get a high return of investment on when you do a system like that without getting out of the norm of what you do in your business. So it adds to it without ripping and replacing an ERP system. You know, you've got companies, you know, SWK has done a great job of making sure their companies and their customers have these great systems that run their businesses extremely well. Simply adding on these pieces and integrating to them really does provide a ton of ROI and benefit to those customers, and allows them to move forward in that digital transformation as they're moving forward. And like you said, because we have one product that integrates to many places, it just becomes one more point in that digital transformation where they, you know, they move a piece here, they move their next block there, and they move that along. And when you're working with partners like SWK, they can help you in that technology roadmap to get you where you want to be over the next few years, because it just doesn't happen. It can't happen overnight. It's impossible. But taking specific pieces and moving them up, and knowing that when you move that block, you can build on that tomorrow, is critical in that roadmap. So, you know, we appreciate companies like SWK and working with them, because they're really good at being able to visualize that roadmap and help people in that transformation.
Fantastic. Well, Jesse, great to always share a platform with you and share with our potential customers and our partners like SWK the benefits of spend management. Now, Jolene, I know this has been a bit of a one-way discussion with sort of Jesse and myself chatting. We're happy to take any sort of questions that might have arisen from today's presentation. I know that you've been dealing with the online chats and any kind of questions, but at this point, I'd like to thank SWK for making the time available. To all the participants on today's presentation, thank you very much for taking time to hear our message. Hopefully it's been quite useful. And Jesse and I would love to open the floor to any kind of questions. And if they're very tough and difficult, I'll hand them to Jesse. If they're easy, I'll deal with some of them myself.
Thank you, Stanton. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And as Stanton mentioned, we did have a few come through during the webinar. The first is, what kind of savings could I expect?
Thanks, Jolene. Jesse, I'll handle this one. You know, we did mention savings constantly and ROI throughout the presentation. It's always a bit of a tough one to talk about, because savings can be measured in so many different ways. It can be measured in cost avoidance, it can be measured in productivity improvements, it can be measured in actual reduced price of items by leveraging the supplier negotiations using the data that's embedded within Fraction. And I don't mean to be a consultant and avoid a direct answer, but our experience so far is that most organizations save between sort of 9 and 12% of their indirect spend. So as you can imagine, that's often a very, very significant return on investment. In fact, we'd be frankly disappointed if organizations weren't able to pay for their Fraction investment within the first 6 months of use. but I think it's fairly safe to say that most of the savings cases that I've seen reflect that between sort of 9, 11, 12%, and those have been validated after implementation as well. So I'm fairly confident with that range.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily speak to the productivity side either, Stan, and that's, I think, the understated side of this. The productivity enhancement alone, thinking of that last customer we talked about where they'd saved 90% of their actual paper process, it's really hard to put an ROI number around that. Yeah. But the productivity side is so massive in many of these organizations who are coming off manual systems. It's a staggering number when you start getting into it, when they're seeing that, instead of, like, we manage what 15 billion in spend annually right now, in our customers. Think of trying to do that manually with how many people that would take, and then, we've had companies that have grown 3 and 4 times and haven't added anybody to their staff from a purchasing perspective because of the productivity that they've gained and the visual insights and the automation that they've received through the process. So.
Yeah, no, very, very true. I mean, we enable scale in terms of processing like no other application. And it's difficult to put a price on that in terms of savings. And it's also, something that has to be done. I mean, at some point, transactional volume increases where if you don't have systems in place, your systems will fail. And that puts us into like almost a vital application. But I think if organizations are looking to justify to their senior financial management, those are numbers that we can easily support through multiple case studies and utilizations. Having said that, if we put the true numbers, Jesse, people often find it a bit unbelievable because that unlocking of resource capability is vast with solutions like this.
Wonderful. And then our second is, how do we manage duplicate invoices and expenses?
Yes, okay, so someone was listening to my discussion on duplicate numbers and the like. So that's very interesting. One of the challenges with duplicate invoices is where the invoice numbers aren't consistent. So sometimes it's hell of easy to manage duplicate invoices. If your vendor has issued 2 invoices with the same invoice number, then it's relatively easy to catch. What becomes really challenging to identify is if they've incremented that invoice number. So you've bought one widget and they invoice you with invoice number 123 for one widget, and a week later invoice you with invoice number 124 for one widget. That becomes really, really challenging. Fractions built some alert management policies, which frankly we delivered for expense management, and that was to say, if a vendor submits a transaction for approval and it falls within a certain parameter range, typically a percentage of a dollar amount, within a specified time period, and you can specify that as in every 30 days or within the last 45 days, issue an alert. And what it does is it helps then identify transactions that are very, very similar from the same vendor. And that helps us quickly get and identify duplicate invoices. Incidentally, it's the same technology, as I said, that we developed for expenses. So the same thing applies. So if my sales guy who's traveling submits a claim for 30 miles and I've got X dollar claim, and 45 days later, or then the next expense run or the expense run after that, he submits another similar or identical expense claim in error. Let's give them the benefit of doubt. Then our system will quickly identify that and allow a manager to be able to drill down and say, hang on a second, this is completely consistent with a expense claim that you made 2 months ago. Is this justified? So we provide real-time tools to try to pick that up for invoices and for expenses.
Yeah, and it's about putting information in their hands to make those choices. That's the key.
Our third that came through, our audit team likes to review random transactions. How can the system help?
I have seen this several times before, often in sort of larger companies where audit teams like to take sample transactions, usually over a sort of dollar value, and then apply a second set of eyes. either during the approval process or post the approval process. Now, Fraction has the capability, and I did mention quite several times our risk mitigation strategies. And one of those risk mitigation strategies sort of plays into the hands of that internal audit function. So we can specify a dollar amount for a particular reporting group or an approval group, and specify that any transaction that exceeds a certain value then gets routed for additional processing. And the objective here, I suppose, is that if we've got a manager who's got a high value transaction, a high value approval limit, it's at $10,000 a transaction, and he's new or has made some dodgy decisions beforehand, possibly we want to be able to have a look at, in parallel to his approval, any transactions over a certain value, let's say 6,000 or 7,000, that would normally be approved. We want to route that off for audit approval, and that's completely supported in the system. So it's a very powerful risk mitigation feature that allows everyone just to be honest and having transparency around those approval processes.
And then we have one last one that came through. We have groups of approvers. Can the system support this?
Jesse, you want me to handle this one? I've seen
that.
Thanks. So in some organizations, we see groups or line managers who have a similar approval limit. And it's quite an unusual scenario, but probably about 30–40% of our implementations we see this, where a request gets routed and then any number of managers for this group could respond, but only one needs to respond, and they approve or authorize, and then it sort of kicks up into the normal approval process. It's often a strategy that's used to accommodate managers who might occasionally be off or traveling, and you allocate a group so that that request gets dealt with as quickly and efficiently as possible. And initially, in the first versions of the product, it was a challenge. And I think as far back as about 2018, we introduced the concept of group approval, where you can specify multiple approvers at any level, and any one of those approvers is able to authorize that expenditure according to their limits. So it's quite unusual in that you might have a manager with a $1,000 limit, another one with a $2,000 limit. You can set them at that same level, where either of them would be able to approve that limit. But if the transaction is, let's say, $1,500, the first person would approve it. If he or she only had a $1,000 limit, then it would still go for routing upwards. However, if that other manager who had the $2,000 limit approved it, and the transaction was below $2,000, it would be fully approved. So, certainly we've engineered that capability in, and as I said, about 30% of our customers utilize that functionality.
Wonderful. Well, I believe that's all the questions that have come in for today. So thank you so much, Stanton and Jesse, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today.
Fantastic, Jolene. I really appreciate the opportunity. As I mentioned before, we have a great piece of content which we refer to as the definitive guide to spend management. So if there's any interest from any of today's participants in terms of the information that we've provided and how to enact it in your organization, please reach out to Jolene, and she'll gladly provide you with, I think it's about a 20-page white paper, but it's content rich and it's a great tool to help you plan for more effective spend management.
Thank you, Stanton. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Jolene. Thank you, the rest of the participants.